Thank you very much. It's great to be back in the Midwest. I was raised in Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and as a matter of fact, I lived in corrupt situations. Of course, I had the privilege of having served under that great American J. Edgar Hoover for 21 years, till he passed away in May of 1972. And don't you let our adversaries tell you anything different. They have put out disinformation, and he is the victim of an extensive disinformation program that he's a homosexual. He was not a homosexual. Instead of making him a homosexual and a degenerate, I'm sure they would love to say that too. They've tried. I must say he was an American hero. Instead, they've taken people who were sympathetic to the communist movement and made heroes out of them. As far as I'm concerned, schools and streets right today should be named after J. Edgar Hoover. As Ephraim Zimbalist said to me once, I play golf with Ephraim once in a while, when the lion is dead, the rats come out of the woodwork, and that's the case with Mr. Hoover. But anyway, in my bureau career, people have asked me, didn't you see any corruption? No, I did not see any corruption. And possibly because in the bureau, at the time of my retirement, there were 164 categories. If any cases came in that fell in those 164 categories, we investigated it. Otherwise, it went in what we call a zero basket. And we did a great job. These included kidnapping, bank robbery, extortion, skyjackings. I handled the skyjacking personally, negotiated with the skyjacker July 12, 1972, Philadelphia International Airport. Background checks, Communist Party USA, Black Panthers, internal security, espionage, and the list goes on and on and on. We had a great record. I'm sorry to say that the Bureau has changed. There's no question about it. The FBI today, in 1996, is being used by the politicians to further their gains and their goals. So, there are a few things that have happened to me, some major matters that have happened to me since my retirement. And most recently, I was giving a lecture in Las Vegas, and I sat at the head table next to a gentleman. And this gentleman, in his day, had been in naval intelligence, and he was telling me that on December the 4th, 1941, 3 days before Pearl Harbor, he was in the communications room in Washington, D.C., a naval intelligence officer, and we received, the U.S. government received a communication, an intercept of Japanese message that had been sent, and we had broken the Japanese code, and this message stated that we were going to bomb Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. He was very elated to have received this. He passed it up to his superior passed it on. After the war was over, he came back to Washington, D.C., and was told he was going to have to testify. They had a congressional hearing on this. He was given a subpoena. His boss called him in and said, even though you have a subpoena, you're not going to testify. And he said, well, I don't understand this. He says, look, you don't understand now, someday you will. You're not going to testify. And he didn't testify. Now, it's been documented, and I've heard it on a number of occasions, that we knew about Pearl Harbor in advance. This is the first time I've had information directly from a person who was aware of this. I also received some information recently in my tours and lectures and what have you. I did a TV show in Long Beach, California. One of the gentlemen involved in the show was in the U.S. Army at one time. He told me that in the spring of 1973, we had bombed all of the North Vietnamese supply lines. We had mined their harbors. They were cut off. And one of his associates was in the communication room in Saigon, and this is, of course, a classified job. And when he was in this room, he received this message from the North Vietnamese: we surrender unconditionally. He passed it on to his superiors, And all Army personnel were immediately ushered out and replaced by State Department personnel. It was shortly thereafter that Kissinger met with the North Vietnamese officials in Paris, France. Why do these things happen? Why did we not take advantage of the advance notice of Pearl Harbor? And why is it necessary for us to be a subservient to North Vietnam when we obviously have won? I think at the end of this lecture, you may have the answer. In fact, I'm sure you'll have the answer. I think you'll understand much better than you do and have in recent years. Anyway, when I first came out of the FBI, as I said, I came out in 1979. Attorney General Griffin Bell hired me to coordinate security for the Pan American Games. Attorney General Griffin Bell was under Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, and I went to San Juan, Puerto Rico for the summer of '79. Great experience. I lived with the athletes, 5,500 athletes in the village there. And I'm happy to report that America's softball team, girls softball team I might add, adopted me as their mascot. So I have a nice softball autographed by all the ladies of our softball team. In fact, I even rode to all the games with them on the bus. But anyway, they won the gold medal, of course. That's beside the point. But I had a great experience. And I came back and started my own international security consulting firm in Los Angeles, California. And I was a consultant for the '84 Olympics in Los Angeles. And one of my first cases that I handled, I was contacted by some of Dr. Jeffrey R. McDonald's doctor friends. I don't know if you remember the movie Fatal Vision, the book Fatal Vision. This was a former Green Beret doctor, and he was a doctor at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. On February the 17th, 1970, he was asleep in his living room. It was a house on Castle Drive on the base. It was an open base, however. And he was awakened by two white males, a black male in E6 sergeant stripes with camouflage jacket, and also by a white female with a floppy white hat and a long blonde wig. The white female had lights flickering across her face. She was chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs, acid is groovy, kill the pigs." The two white males, one had a knife, one had an ice pick. The black male with the E6 sergeant stripe camouflage jacket on had a 32-inch bed slat. We found out later it was actually a bed slat, but to McDonald at that time it was just a post of some, or a pole of some sort. And Dr. McDonald according to him, wrapped his hands and his wrists with his pajama tops and was feigning off the blow. While he was fighting with them, he heard his daughter say, "Jeff, Jeff, help me, help me." And he heard his daughter, it's a 5.5-year-old daughter say that, and his wife yelling, "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing this to me?" He felt a sharp pain to his right side. He awoke probably an hour and 15 minutes later, maybe hour and a half. He was half in the living room, half in the hallway. Total silence in the house. He went back. Here was his wife with 26 stab wounds in her chest. The children had numerous stab wounds in their bodies. All three of them were killed. The government, it was on a government reservation. The government claimed that Dr. McDonald went to bed and he noticed that the 5.5-year-old child who was sleeping with the mother had wet the bed, and he had a big argument with his wife. And because of this argument over the child wetting the bed, he wiped out the whole family. It's absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, so I was asked by some of Dr. McDonald's friends to investigate the case. And I told Dr. McDonald, I said, if you're guilty, as soon as I find out you're guilty, I'm not going to investigate any further. If you're innocent, I'll go right to the mat with you. Now, the gentleman had just been convicted in August 1979 of these three murders. Even though the murders had been committed some 9 years prior to this, there were a number of appeals. And he was not indicted by the grand jury until 1974, so that was the reason for the delay. So I entered the case, and I noticed in reviewing the case, going through records, and I spent hours reading all kinds of material, the court dockets and testimony, etc. I noticed that skin that was in Colette's fingernails was turned over to William F. Ivory, who was the chief investigator for the Army, and it disappeared. Dr. McDonald did not have a scratch mark on him. The skin obviously was from one of the assailants, Colette being the wife. From skin, you can tell what type blood the person is who was scratched, right? That just plain disappeared off the earth. Also, in reviewing the records, I noted that there were 14 candle wax drippings in the house. And remember now, Colette had light flickering across her face. And these candle wax drippings, including one that was in the child's bed sheet, were foreign to any other candles and candle wax found in the house. I also noted that an FBI agent, hairs and fibers expert named Paul Stombaugh, lied to the grand jury, and if you want documentation on that, you can read the book Fatal Vision by McGinnis. And in there, it states that he testified before the grand jury and said that the hair in Colette's right hand was Colette's hair. Well, what happened was they found that Colette had hair in her hand. They tested it against Dr. McDonald's. It did not match, so it had to come from someplace. So they said it was Colette's. You cannot say that hair is identical. You can say it's similar. You can say it's cut, pulled, peroxide, what part of the body it came from, and it's similar. I noticed also that according to Helena Stokely, I obtained a confession from her on October 25, 1980. I brought her back to L.A. That's a story by and of itself. And Helena Stokely told me that it was her satanic cult group that went into the house that night. And it was her initiation into the group. And I said, what is this all about? And that was really the first I learned about Satanism. But Helena told me that to prove that she was in the house, that she had attempted to ride the rocking horse in the child's bedroom. The spring was broken. She wouldn't have known about that otherwise. She told me that that there was a jewelry box. I asked her specifically, was there anything, arrangement of the furniture, draw the diagrams of the house and so forth? She did that. I asked her about a jewelry box on the master bedroom dresser. She said there was a jewelry box there. I had her describe it. And she described it. I went down and got a Sears and Roebuck catalog. I showed her the catalog. She picked out the box. It was identical with it. She talked about also that there was something unusual happened that night. She said that right in the middle of all this commotion and this fighting, that the phone rang. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, I answered the phone, and there was a man asked for Dr. McDonald. And I said, well, then what happened after that? And she said, well, Dwight Smith, who was the person she identified as also being there were some 7 individuals involved in the crime, said, hang up the GD phone. And so she hung up the phone. Well, later on, I found out through my investigative effort that the person who made that call was a fellow named James Fryer, and he was in the penitentiary in western North Carolina, out of Asheville, North Carolina. And I called the warden. I made arrangements to go out and interview him on a Saturday morning. Well, when I arrived out there that morning, can you guess what happened? He had escaped the night before. And in developing additional information on the case, I learned that one of the early prosecutors, Jim Proctor, was the judge's ex-son-in-law. He was divorced from his wife, but still the judge was a grandfather to the children. And I learned that the police intelligence files on this group of Satanists that Helena described by name gave me descriptions of exactly where each one of them went in the house, what happened, step by step. Intelligence files disappeared out of the Fayetteville Police Department files and also out of Waycross, Georgia, because one of them had been arrested down there. I learned subsequently that there were 2 black fibers on Colette's tongue in her mouth. There was a black fiber on the 32-inch bed slat. And there was a black fiber wool on her chest, black wool, okay? Determined it was black wool. The FBI had in their notes, their handwritten notes, that it was black wool and a question mark as to where it came from. When the report was filed, typed up, the formal report was typed up and filed and furnished to the defense, that information was left out. Now, in conducting my investigation, I learned that the only black wool in the house that night was Helena Stokely's skirt. She had on a black wool skirt. I also learned that as a result of my confession, and later on there were some other confessions, a girl named Kathy Perry confessed to the FBI, but she said that she was high on drugs, and there were two children, they were boys that were killed that night, so the FBI discounted it. There's another individual, Greg Mitchell, who was one of the assailants named by Helena Stokely, who confessed to the neighbors that he was involved in the murders. But to this day, to this very day, that man is still in jail, in spite of this overwhelming evidence that he's innocent. Now, to confirm and document that it was a satanic cult murder, there were several signs that were left behind. This is always usually the case. They always leave signs behind. There were unexplained bird feathers in the house. There was a headless doll, and the 2.5-year-old child had 10 shallow ice pick wounds in her chest in the form of an S. I asked Helena, I said, Helena, what did that S stand for? And she said, Satanism. So this was a shock to me. The McDonald case, this man's in jail. I couldn't understand it. I went on national television, a number of national TV shows. I debated Freddie Kassab, the father-in-law, on CNN, and also a psychiatrist was there. And I talked about this satanic aspect. And I had people calling me from all over the country, telling me the same basic story, from the East Coast to West Coast, North and South. And I had people that, what you'd call them multi-generation Satanists. That's somebody who was born into it, mother, father, grandfather, grandmother are involved in Satanism. And adult survivors, that's somebody that gets out, usually has to go into hiding to survive. I had these people call me from all over the country telling me about the ceremonies and about the extent of the satanic movement in this country today. So I started investigating it myself. I gave a number of lectures on it. I had some national exposure, of course. And the bottom line is it's very easily explained, and it fits into a pattern. And this goes back some 200 years. I'm going to use as a textbook tonight Pawns in the Game. It's a book that was written by William Guy Carr. He's a retired commander in the Canadian Naval Force. And he had heard about the conspiracy and wanted to delve into it himself. He wrote a very compact book about what's going on with the Illuminati and how this fits into modern-day plans, what's going on in the world today. So we're going to use that as a textbook for the first 2 hours. And the second 2 hours, we'll have some case studies. So let's start out by stating and by showing you. We'll start with this page in the prefix. And you see this, we'll start up here. In 1784, an act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the continuing Luciferian conspiracy. This explains the previous 9 pages, goes into it in detail. We don't have time to do it completely. Conspiracy. Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, defected from Christianity and embraced the Luciferian ideology while teaching at Ingolstadt University. In 1770, the money lenders who had recently organized the House of Rothschild retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols designed to give the Synagogue of Satan ultimate world domination so they can impose the Luciferian ideology upon what remains of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weishaupt completed his task on May the 1st, 1776. It's a communist holiday, isn't it? May 1, 1776. The plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. This objective was to be reached by dividing the masses, whom he termed goyim, meaning human cattle, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, racial, social, economic, and other issues. The opposing sides were then to be armed, and an incident provided which would cause them to fight and weaken themselves as they destroyed national governments and religious institutions. In 1776, Weishaupt organized the Illuminati to put the plot into execution. The word Illuminati is derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light. Using the lie that his objective was to bring about a one-world government, to enable men with proven mental ability to govern the world, he recruited about 2,000 followers. These included the most intelligent men in the field of arts and letters, education, the sciences, finance, and industry. He then established lodges of the Grand Orient to be their secret headquarters. Weishaupt's revised plan required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them accomplish their purpose. 1, use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of people already occupying positions in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of human endeavor. Once an influential person had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail and threats of financial ruin, public exposure, and physical harm, and even death to themselves and their loved ones. We're going to take these a point at a time. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what's going on in this country today. This is a recent headline, not too recent, 1989, June the 30th, 1989. Power broker served drugs, sex at parties bugged for blackmail. Here's another headline. Homosexual prostitution probe ensnarls the fissures of the Bush and Reagan administration. Top Japanese politician linked to Spence. Craig Spence was a CIA operative. He was exposed as a CIA operative. His job was to set up dignitaries, politicians, congressmen, etc., and to blackmail them. Once he was exposed, of course, he didn't last too long. He lasted something like 6 months. Within 6 months, I think he was suicidal. Now, recently, it's sometimes referred to as Arkancided, by the way. Not Spence, though. This was before Mr. Bill Clinton was in the White House. But in my experience as a private investigator, security consultant over the last 17 years, I've had a number of high-profile cases in addition to the Jeffrey McDonald case. And I'm happy to report I've had a phenomenal success record on it. It takes a lot of time, a lot of diligence, and the right contacts in order to be successful in this field. But in 1989, I was contacted by a gentleman by the name of Ed Weaver, a wonderful Christian man in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he had read about me in a book called The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry. The Ultimate Evil was a story about the Son of Sam murders in New York, recruited some top Army personnel, some police officers, 2 attorneys in Fayetteville, occasions. It's dated April 3, 1996. This article deals with the Freeman. The Freeman's beliefs are described as the headlines. I got mad not too long ago when I heard Brandy Schweitzer, Leroy Schweitzer's daughter, was claiming that her father was being tortured by the U.S. Marshal. I jumped on a plane and flew to Montana to find out for myself. I interviewed Brandy Schweitzer and Scott Schweitzer, and I interviewed another individual who saw Leroy Schweitzer, the head of the Freeman Group in Montana, the day that he was arraigned, and he had a 1.5-inch gash on his cheek, and I took statements from these people on camera. And so I do have a little bit of first-hand knowledge. I've also interviewed a number of people who have attended the school. And in fact, Jeremiah Television is doing a video on it, and I'm helping them in that regard. I just want to read this to you. But after a week of being confined to the snow-covered ranch, watched by federal agents who have a direct telephone line to the ranch compound, the Freemen are showing signs of leaning more heavily on the racist Christian identity teachings that form the basis of their politics. It's very frightening, said Eric Ward, Associate Director of the Northwest Coalition Against Malicious Harassment. Sometimes I wonder who's being harassed, by the way. The Seattle-based human rights group is well known in the region for keeping track of neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other fringe groups. They believe there's a world conspiracy that has signaled them out and that satanic powers will be turned against them, Ward said. It creates the idea of being crusaders or even martyrs for the cause. The Christian identity movement holds that white people from Northern Europe are God's chosen, while Jews are the offspring of Satan and blacks are subhuman, quote, mud people, end quote. This theory may be the backbone of the Freemen's efforts to set up their own government. Notice it said maybe, right? To set up their own government and claim America for, quote, true citizens. It's like a cult, Ward said. These are people who have isolated themselves from the rest of society. There's no moderating influence. They're feeding on one another's fears and paranoia. That becomes an explosive situation for those who have to deal with this group. I've asked everybody I've interviewed who's attended that school, I've asked them about this article, and they said, not true, not true. That's how the media, the news is slanted. Now, I'd like to read, in conclusion with number 13, I'd like to read from an article that appeared in Operation Vampire Killer 2000. Some of you may have already seen this. And here's what it says. David Rockefeller, international billionaire, humanist, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations kingpin, founder of the Trilateral Commission, World Order Godfather, and in all probability the high school graduated, voted most likely to be hanged for treason. I didn't say that. Voiced his praise of the control of the U.S. media for keeping their oath not to divulge the globist plans to the public. Speaking to his fellow conspirators at a meeting of yet one more infamous world order group, the Bilderbergers, Mr. Rockefeller said, by the way, I have a book that's available. You talk about control of the media, control of the press. It's called Who's Who of the Elite. And if you're interested in this book, I'll be glad to make it available to you. I'll just have to give you the information. My address will appear, by the way, on this video at the end. And if I can't come up with it, I'll make sure that the Prophecy Club has it available to them if you want to get it from them. But this book is Who's Who of the Elite. This names the members of the Trilateral, current members and past members, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, the Bilderbergers, Skull and Bones, and then it breaks them down. It points out the number that are working in the TV media. It points out the number that are working in universities. There's a lot of them in the universities, folks. It points out the number that are working in the publishing business and the number that work in the print media. I don't have those figures with me, but it's amazing and astounding how many that there are. And that's your control of the media. Anyway, continuing. This is what Rockefeller, according to Operation Vampire Killer 2000, this is what Rockefeller told the Bilderbergers. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promise of discretion for almost 40 years. He went on to explain, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. And then it goes on, that's the end of the quote. It is not reported if the attendees kissed his ring or anything else after their leader bestowed his blessing on those in attendance. Actually, we could ask Governor Clinton or Dan Quayle, both of whom were there. Bush and Clinton are Bilderbergers, internationalists, and their goals are exactly the same for America. Let us repeat. Clinton's, Bush's, Perot's plans for America are virtually identical. The Republican, the Democrats' goal for America are virtually identical. They both are taking our nation into global government. Globalist Mr. Dan Quayle was there in the June 1991 meeting, being sized up as a possible Bilderberger U.S. presidential contender in 1996. The major media's job is to convince Americans that the Republicans and the Democrats are on opposite sides and fighting each other. Interesting. Okay, number 14. He then explained the necessity of having their agent tour always come into the open and appear on the scene when conditions had reached their lowest ebb and the masses have been subjected by means of want and terror. He pointed out that when it was time to restore order, they should do it in such a way that the victims would believe that they had been the prey of criminals and irresponsibles. He said, by executing the criminals and lunatics after they have carried out our preconceived reign of terror, we can make ourselves appear as the saviors of the oppressed and the champions of the workers. The speaker then added, we are interested in just the opposite, in the denudation, the killing out of the goyim. I have received information, and I want to be very cautious about this. I cannot document this. It's strictly intelligence, raw intelligence information, so I don't put it out as a fact. But if it's true, it's something to be concerned about. That weapons are being given to gangs in this country, gangs that are distributing drugs, men on the street, and that these gangs are the ones that have been designated to shoot and eliminate police officers when the time comes. And then the Army or the New World Order or the military, whoever's going to be taking over eventually, will come in and eliminate the gangs. I also have information that the biggest concern of the New World Order is not the militia. That's all a facade. I'm afraid they could eliminate the militia as it stands today without too much difficulty, although there will be some people that will be difficult to locate and seek out. But the biggest concern they have is the veterans who have come back from the various services, particularly the Navy SEALs and the Special Forces. And I have been told, and I think this is accurate information, I don't want to put it out as a fact per se, because I have not seen paper on it, and I usually like to say, this is so because I've seen the documentation. But I've been told that these are the men that they're concerned about, the New World Order is concerned about. These are the men who have already had others assigned for assassination. In other words, these are the ones that will be the first to be assassinated when the New World Order tries to take over. Okay, next. He next explained how industrial depressions and financial panics could be brought about and used to serve their purpose, saying enforced unemployment and hunger imposed on the masses because of the power we have to create shortages of food will create the right of capital to rule more surely than it was given to the real aristocracy and by the legal authority of kings. He claimed that by having their agent tour control the mob, and the mob could then be used to wipe out all who dare to stand in their way. Number 15, financial panic, right? Food shortage. What about the savings and loan? You remember the savings and loan when they deregulated savings and loan? Millions of people lost their money, their life's savings. Right up here in Lincoln, Nebraska, Commonwealth Savings and Loan was written up in on 60 Minutes over that. There's organizations that advocate right today the reduction of the world population. They're actively advocating that. Warren Buffett, the richest man in America, on and off with another gentleman, depending on how much stock they bought the day before, and has been identified by the kids in the Nebraska case as being present at some of the meetings that were held. Warren Buffett is very active in this organization to reduce the world population. It's been alleged that the AIDS epidemic was actually started by the government. And then we have more recently this, the HARP program. For those of you who do not have this book, it is available through the Prophecy Club. Angels Don't Play This Harp, Advances in Tesla's Technology. The HARP program. U.S. government has a new ground-based Star Wars weapon which is being tested in the remote bush country of Alaska. This new system manipulates the environment in a way which can disrupt human mental processes, jam all global communication systems, change weather patterns over large areas, that's happening right today, interfere with wildlife migration patterns, negatively affect your health, unnaturally impact the Earth's upper atmosphere. The U.S. military calls its Zapper HARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. But this Skybuster is not about the northern lights. This device will turn on lights never intended to be artificially manipulated. It's all explained in this book. It's available, I think, back here today. Looking at the Gulf War illness, the British troops and the American troops were vaccinated, 440,000 of them. They were the ones that became ill, not the other troops who were not vaccinated. Looking at the food shortage, people said, oh, there's no food shortage. I have an article here, June 12, 1995, Spotlight Magazine. During the last 18 months, the government has been storing hundreds of tons of grain and other foodstuffs in some 50 secret underground facilities around the country. There are certain grain shortages areas that are empty on a regular basis to the extent that there's hardly any grain available for the general public. Look at it. Let's go on to the next item. Oops. I'm not doing so well, am I? Oops. Let's see. Okay. We talked about financial panics and so forth, depression, financial problems. The infiltration into continental Freemasonry was next discussed extensively. The speaker stated that their purpose would be to take advantage of the facilities and secrecy Freemasonry had to offer. He pointed out that they could organize their own Grand Orient lodges within Blue Masonry in order to carry on their subversive activities and hide the true nature of their work under the cloak of philanthropy. He stated that all members initiated into their Grand Orient lodges should be used to politicize purposes and for spreading their atheistic, materialistic ideology amongst the Goyams. He ended this phase of the discussion with the words, "When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of all the world to be crowned, these same hands will sweep away everything that might stand in their way." Number 17, he next expounded the value of systematic deception, pointing out that their agentur should be trained in the use of high-sounding phrases and the use of popular slogans. They should make the masses the most lavish of promises. He observed the opposite of what has been promised can always be done afterwards, that is, if no consequences. That is, of no consequences. He reasoned that by using such words as freedom and liberty, the Goyams could be stirred up to such a pitch and patriotic fever that they could be made to fight even against the laws of God and nature. He added, and for this reason, after we obtain control of the very name of God, we'll be erased from the lexicon of life. He then detailed the plans for revolutionary war, the art of street fighting, and outlined the pattern of the reign of terror, which he insisted must accompany every revolutionary effort, because it is the most economical way to bring the population to a speedy subjection. Well, we have most recently here Janet Reno, among other things, once a national hit team, February 27, 1995. You find it interesting that she is talking about using U.S. military units as well as personnel from all the federal agencies, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, drug enforcement agencies, and I'm sure the FBI, yes, the FBI. And in fact, under the proposed new act, the Rapid Deployment Strike Force would be commanded by Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI and would be staffed by not only FBI agents, but through the transfer of personnel from their elite entities into the Department of Justice or any other federal agency. So, we have there a direct contradiction and violation of the posse comitatus. I might mention that it's been documented that the military and civilian law enforcement agencies, federal agencies, have had a series of joint training sessions in Michigan and in Arizona in house-to-house training. House-to-house training of going in and searching the houses and taking over a facility. Well, let's see, what was that last question? That was number 18. Number 19. Diplomacy was next discussed. After all wars, secret diplomacy must be insisted upon in order that our agentur, masquerading as political, financial, economic advisors, can carry out our mandates without fear of exposing who are the secret power behind the national and international affairs. The speaker then told those present that by secret diplomacy they must obtain such control that the nation cannot come to even an inconceivably private agreement without our secret agents being on hand. Number 20, the ultimate world government is the goal. To reach this goal, the speaker told them it will be necessary to establish huge monopolies, reservoirs of such colossal riches that even the largest fortunes of the Goyams will depend on us to such an extent that they will go to the bottom together with the credit of their government on the day after the great political smash. The speaker then added, you gentlemen here present who are economists just strike an estimate of the significance of this combination. Well, I think you may recall, since you are a well-educated group, about the meeting in San Francisco, September 27th to October 1st, global plans for global civilization. Gorbachev, Bush led the charge. It was chaired by Ted Turner. Margaret Thatcher was also there. Margaret Thatcher was the one person that said, no, I want to maintain sovereignty for Great Britain, for England. And she walked out on it. What about our people? Don't you think we deserve sovereignty? Of course we do. And now, in order to take over the world, or take over the country, you have to have certain situations which are in existence, and certain commands, and certain mandates, and a certain degree of power. And this is it right here. These are presently in order right now. Executive orders now in effect. Check them one against the Communist Manifesto. We'll turn over to the Communist Manifesto next. Now let me explain. Executive orders, this is unconstitutional, this whole thing right here. Because executive orders were designed to give directives to departmental heads within the government. In other words, the president can tell the director of the FBI, do this. He can tell the Department of Justice, Attorney General, do this. The Postmaster General, do this. Okay? Executive Order 10995 takes over all communications Executive Order 10997 takes over all electric power, petroleum, gas, fuel, and minerals. Executive Order 10998 takes over all food resources and farms. Executive Order 10999 takes over all means of transportation, controls highways and seaports. Executive Order 11000 drafts all citizens into workforces under government supervision, slave laborers. Sounds like Nazi Germany to me. Executive Order 11001 takes over all health, welfare, and educational functions. We already have, what's the United Nations outcome education? And this is in many of our schools today, so they've already started in the educational functions. Executive Order 11002 empowers the Post Office General to register all citizens nationwide. They're probably already doing that through credit cards, and Social Security Administration. I'd say that's probably already in effect. Executive Order 11003 takes over all airports and aircraft. Executive Order 11004 takes over housing and finance authorities and housing designated as unsafe, establishes new locations for populations, builds new housing with public funds. Executive Order 11005 takes over railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities. Don't you find public storage facilities kind of a strange? And that's strange that they would say that. But I can certainly understand why, because they want to go after the guns, they want to go after the food. There is a new legislation. I heard it's been passed, but at least I can say without any question it's been proposed, that would limit the time limit that you have food on your shelf in your home. Yes. By the way, going back to HARP, I forgot to mention, one of the devices on HARP, that's the electronic high frequency in Alaska that we mentioned a few minutes ago. Any car that's been built the last 4 years has a computer chip in it. And HARP can freeze that car in place once they turn it on. They have the capability of doing that. In New Jersey, they recently passed a law that placed very high restrictions on the exhaust emission of automobiles, and it's been stated, and I have the records of this someplace, I don't have it with me here today, that most of the automobiles that are 10 years old and older will not be able to pass the emission test in New Jersey. And, of course, that would not include the automobiles that have been built in the last 4 years. Executive Order 11051 designates the responsibilities of the Office of Emergency Planning, giving authorization to put the above orders into effect in times of increased international tension or economic crisis, anytime they want to do it, in other words. Then comes the big one, Executive Order 11490. All of the above orders are immediately activated. President John Kennedy at Columbia University in 1963 said it perfectly. The high office of the President has been used to foment a plot to destroy America's freedom, and before I leave this office, I must inform the citizens of their plight. 10 days later, he was dead. Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto represents a misguided philosophy which teaches the citizens to give up the rights for the sake of the common good, but it also ends in a police state. This is called preventative justice. Control is a key concept. Read this carefully. Abolishment of private property. Heavy progressive income tax. Abolishment of all rights of inheritance. Confiscation of property for all immigrants and rebels. A central bank. Government control of communication and transportation. Government ownership of factories and agriculture. Government control of labor. Corporate farms, regional planning. By the way, to have corporate farms, you just about have to take over all the farms, don't you? Well, what are they doing in this country today? The big conglomerates are coming in and taking over the farms and the ranches when you can't meet your note in IRS, like in the Gordon Call case. Government control of education. Now let's look at. I took this out of the book recently. And these are, we're going back to the Illuminati now. We're going back 200 years. In a meeting on July the 16th, 1782, they set forth a 7-part goal. Order of chaos, abolition of private property, abolishment of inheritance, patriotism, all religion, abolishment of the family. What are they doing in this country today? Look at the moral fibers that are being destroyed through drugs. Drugs that are being brought into this country by government people. Creation of a new world order. 1782, a new world order. Number 21. Economic war. Plans to rob the Goyams of their landed properties and industries were then discussed. A combination of high taxes and unfair competition was advocated to bring about the economic ruin of the Goyim as far as their national financial interests and investments were concerned. In the international field, he felt that they could be encouraged to price themselves out of the markets. This could be achieved by the careful control of raw materials, organized agitation amongst the workers for shorter hours and higher pay, and by subsidizing competitors. The speaker warned his co-conspirators that they must arrange matters and control conditions so that the increased wages obtained by the workers will not benefit them in any way. What's happening today? The price of cattle. Somebody told me that cattle in Texas is selling for 15 cents a pound. The feed is so high that they can't buy the feed, among other things. What about GATT and NAFTA, North American Free Trade? There's 16,400 Americans lose their jobs every day since GATT and NAFTA were passed. There's been over 800,000 people who've lost their jobs because of GATT and NAFTA. In the oil industry alone, from 1986 to 1992, the number of operating oil rigs dropped from 4,000 to less than 650. Oil was being we were self-sustaining ourselves to a degree, and in lieu of the active oil wells, we have instead 15 super tankers that are bringing 15 million barrels of oil a day into Houston, Texas. Zapata Oil Company owns 5 of these super tankers. Zapata Oil Company is owned by the George Bush family. All the oil that we have in Alaska, I understand that there's been a strike in Alaska, and there's no question we could be self-sustaining just from the oil that's available to us in that state. Now, for the 26 years from 1946 to 1971, speaking of the America's economy, 1946 to 1971, for 26 years, the U.S. trade had a surplus of $98 billion. The economy grew from 4.8% per year. The national debt rose to $148 billion. For the next 23 years, from 1972 to 1994, the U.S. suffered a $1.6 trillion trade deficit, whereas we had a surplus of $98 billion before. The economy grew 3.8%. The federal debt soared at an annual rate of 3,200% per year, more than preceding 26, not per year, but the rate of 3,200% more than any preceding 26 years by $4.3 trillion. So we have, where do we leave off? Number 21, 22, armaments. It was suggested that the building up of armaments for the purpose of making the Goyim destroy each other should be launched at such a colossal scale that in the final analysis there will only be the masses of the proletariat left in the world, with the few millionaires devoted to our cause and police and soldiers sufficient to protect our interests. Number 23, the new order. Members of the one world government would be appointed by the director. He would pick men from among the scientists, the economists, the financiers, the industrialists, and from the millionaires, because in substance everything will be settled by the question of figures. Number 24, importance of youth. The importance of capturing the interest of youth was emphasized with the admonition that our agenteurs should infiltrate into all classes and levels of society and government for the purpose of fooling, bemusing, and corrupting the younger members of society by teaching them theories and principles we know to be false. Well, certainly we see that today in our youth. Look at the, you know, when I was I remember when I was in grade school and junior high and high school, I never even heard of drugs. Now my granddaughter tells me in junior high that there's drugs all over the place. It's more serious every day. Number 25, national and international laws should be changed, but should be used as they are to destroy the civilization of the Goyim, merely by twisting them into a contradiction of the interpretation which first masks the law and afterwards hides it altogether. Our ultimate aim is to substitute arbitration by law. The speaker then told his listeners, "You may think the Goyim will rise upon us with arms, but in the West we have against this possibility an organization of such appalling terror that the very stoutest hearts quail. The underground, the metropolitans, the subterranean corridors, these will be established in the capitals and cities of all the counties before that danger threatens." I have from a number of sources, these are confidential sources, that there are numerous underground facilities available to our adversaries throughout the United States. I have been told by a source that's reliable, a source that's involved in the intelligence community, that there is extensive city underground in the Las Vegas, Nevada area. I've also been told by reliable sources that there is a piece of equipment that will go through hard rock at the rate of, I think, 10 miles an hour. I'm not sure about how many miles an hour it'll go. And it'll spit this rock out, and you can drive a car or a train through it. I don't think there's any question about the underground subterranean efforts of this country. Going back to NAT and GAFTA, this is sent to me by an attorney, and the position statement: the so-called free trade under NAFTA and GATT is neither free nor fair. Free trade is newspeak for the subversive policy that was designed to destroy the American economy. It was hatched up by Harry Dexter White versus Frank Cole and Harold Glasser, mainlined by Senator George W. Malone on page 76. The Senate Finance Committee heard testimony on GATT that 32 nations favored tariff goods on goods which they exported to the United States. Every one of these nations had recently increased its tariffs on American goods. Now, one of them imposed the tariffs for the only admissible business reason there is, namely, to equalize the wage standards of living between two countries engaged in trade. That's mainline page 77. If a $10,000 American automobile is sold on the American market, $4,000 of that price is made up of taxes paid to support the government in the United States where that market is made possible. A Japanese car makes no such contribution to the American infrastructure. President Nixon explained it clearly. If we buy steel rail from England, they have the money and we have the rail. If we buy steel rail from ourselves, we have both the money and the rail. Allowing products that do not pay American taxes or American wages to plunder American markets destroys American jobs. American dollars are taken out of the American economy where the money creates more American products with American jobs. It is not building walls to protect the American economy from an anti-American policy that tears down American productivity and prosperity. That, ladies and gentlemen, I think fairly well documents the goals and aims of the New World Order. And then I would like to go on and describe some other activity that's taking place in this country. And by the way, before I forget, I need to tell you about a march, that's taking place right after the Republican convention out of San Diego. It's going to take place from, they're going to march from San Diego to Washington, D.C. It's being sponsored by an organization known as CALL, down at the bottom. Let's see if this works down here. Here, CALL. And CALL is Citizens Against Legal Loopholes. You might be interested in contacting these people for a Liberty Weekend. They plan to have the rally in D.C., and the number there at the bottom is 619-755-9319. And the purpose of the rally and the march to Washington, D.C. is to attract attention and to alert people to the problems that we're having in this country today, and particularly in regards to the Constitution of the United States. Now, continuing with the New World Order, I'd like to point out that in this newspaper article, August 27th, 1994, at the bottom, in Oklahoma City, this article asks for applicants for a new federal transfer center in Oklahoma City. And it was estimated that thousands of Oklahomans would apply for this job. The airport prison transfer center is designed to hold 1,400 inmates for a maximum of 10 days each. Officials anticipate the transfer center will remain in full capacity continuously. Why would we need a federal transfer center all of a sudden at full capacity, 1,400 every 10 days? That's over 50,000 transfers a year. I think something like 55,000. I talked to an ex-con recently, federal prisoner. He was in the federal prison at one time, not anymore. He told me that the federal prisoners are being used and being paid $5.50 a day to work at the abandoned military bases, and they are constructing concentration camps there. This is directly from the horse's mouth. Before George Bush left office, he signed a treaty with the United Nations. This is a document from the Army that I obtained through one of my sources, and it's called Bridge to America, Partnership States. And this treaty, which was not presented to Congress, and so therefore after 90 days it was not ratified by Congress. After 90 days it becomes law. This treaty designated foreign troops to serve in various capacities in each state in our country, the United States. For example, in Texas, it would be Czechoslovakian troops. And while the Czechoslovakian troops are occupying Texas, American troops will be occupying some countries overseas, certain countries overseas. California will be Ukrainian troops. Illinois, Polish troops. I don't see Kansas on there. I don't see Missouri. I see Alabama and Illinois. Poland. Illinois will be Polish troops. So, I don't know of those of you who are aware of this, but not too long ago it was proposed. The proposal for House Rule 666. They're pretty arrogant, aren't they? Was designed to allow police officers more leeway in searching suspects and properties according to a summary prepared by a House subcommittee. H.R. 666 would legislatively expand the good faith exceptions to situations where law enforcement officials gather evidence without a warrant. In other words, if a police officer believes he or she has a good reason to search you or your property, he can. Conservatives have long argued correctly that too many criminals exploit technicalities to beat the rap. On the other hand, critics have pointed out correctly that the Fourth Amendment protects all Americans, including criminals, from illegal, unconstitutional search and seizure. What an officer feels is irrelevant where the Constitution has been violated. A legislative advocate of the Civil Liberties Union, I don't know how you pronounce that, TAFA, I guess, the Civil Liberties Union, National Capital Area, told the Spotlight, this is just a new excuse to violate the Constitution. All of this hullabaloo is that law enforcement officers want separate rights, she added. Who will police the police? Apparently, some congressmen wanted to know the exact same thing. For example, Democratic amendments to the bill excluded agents of the Internal Revenue Service and the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms from rule. Representative Jim Traficant, Democrat Ohio, introduced the IRS exclusion, and Representative Harold Volkmer, Democrat Missouri, insisted the BATF abide by the Fourth Amendment. They are the biggest abusers of the rights of the gun owners and private citizens, Volkmer said. They're like a Rambo operation, and people here are realizing that. Representative Joseph Serrano, Democrat, New York, introduced an amendment to have the Immigration Naturalization Service excluded. It was defeated 330 to 103. The real danger of House Rule 666 lies in the attitude of Republicans, where when Representative Melvin Watt, Democrat, North Carolina, proposed replacing language in the bill with language very similar to the Fourth Amendment, the House voted 303 to 121 against his amendment. Representative Bill McCollum, Republican, Florida, the bill's sponsor, said the language would gut the bill. Several Republicans agreed with him on the record. What the Democrats weren't telling anyone is the Democratic-controlled houses of the 101st and 102nd Congress passed bills aimed at doing the same thing, possibly penning citizens to unconstitutional warrantless searches, according to the subcommittee report. This bill, I understand, is not passed. It was proposed. I don't know how many of you are aware of a survey. This was, again, by Spotlight. By the way, I don't know if any of you take the Spotlight, but it's a very good alternative source, also Media Bypass. There's a publication, Contact, in Las Vegas that has some good information. And, but you... It did pass, okay. 666 did pass. The Spotlight has obtained a copy of the survey given to members of the U.S. Marine Corps asking, among other things, the willingness to serve in various capacities under the command of the United Nations. The most frightening of all, however, was a question asking if they had any reservations upon the citizens who refused to turn over their personal firearms as part of a gun confiscation program. The survey was given to Marines on May 10th at the 29 Palms Marine Corps base located on the southeast corner of the Mojave Desert, about 70 miles due south of San Bernardino, California, just east of Los Angeles. Among other things, the Marine facility is the site of the Corps' I can't read that, commanded by Brigadier General Sutton, an Expeditionary Air Force, which is used as a test and training center for the Marines of the 1st Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Combat Company, which utilizes unmanned aerial drones intended for long-range reconnaissance purposes. According to a young Marine who provided a copy of the survey to the Spotlight, it was given by a naval commander who claims he was working on his master's degree and was writing his thesis about giving up our military sovereignty to the United Nations Secretary General. Those taking the survey were limited to veterans of Operation Just Cause, the U.S. invasion of Panama, Operation Desert Storm, the war against Iraq, or Operation Restore Hope, the supposed humanitarian mission to feed starving Somalians. While the surveys were being passed out to the young Marines, one was able to obtain 2 copies from the pile of questionnaires. Under the heading Combat Arms Survey, the questionnaire stated that questions is to gather data concerning the attitude of combat-trained personnel with regards to our non-traditional missions. All of your responses are confidential. Write your answer directly in the questionnaire form. In Part 2, place an X in the space provided for your response. The series of situations posed to the servicemen is as follows. The U.S. runs a field training exercise. UN combat troops should be allowed to serve in U.S. combat units during these exercises under U.S. command and control. The United Nations runs a field training exercise. U.S. combat troops under U.S. command and control should serve in UN combat unit during these exercises. The UN runs a field training exercise. U.S. combat troops should serve under UN command and control during these exercises. U.S. combat troops should participate in UN missions under United Nations command and control. U.S. combat troops should be commanded by UN officers and non-commissioned officers at battalion and company levels while performing UN missions, and it goes on and on. I feel the President of the United States has the authority to pass his responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief to the Secretary General. I feel there is conflict, and it goes on. But to make a long story short, one of the questions, as you can see, was I would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse to resist confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. The results of the survey were not available right there, but the ultimate result was 75% of the Marines said that they would not fire on a fellow citizen. And unfortunately, 25% said that they would fire on a fellow citizen. I wanted to get into some other case files and some specifics for the next 2 hours. And concerned with international trafficking in children, high-tech transfers to the United Kingdom, and international transfer of currency. On March 31, 1987, I contacted James Bradley of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department. I was to meet with Bradley to review the documents seized pursuant to 2 search warrants executed in February 87. The meeting was to take place April 2nd or 3rd, 1987. Read this next 3 paragraphs, close 4 paragraphs. On April 2nd, 1987, I arrived at the Metropolitan Police Department at approximately 9 a.m. Detective Bradley was not available. I spoke with a third party who was willing to discuss the case with me on a strictly off-the-record basis. I was advised that all the passport data had been turned over to the State Department for their investigation. The State Department, in turn, advised the Metropolitan Police that all travel and use of the passports by the holders of the passports was within the law and no action would be taken. This included travel to Moscow, North Korea, and North Vietnam from the late 1950s to the mid-1970s. Weren't we at war during that period with these people? And I think travel was forbidden in those days, right? When you're at war with the country. This individual further advised me of circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the finders, watch this, look at this, had become a CIA internal matter. The Metropolitan Police report has been classified secret. It was not available for review. I was advised that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior and that the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence Division, that's headquarters, by the way, had directed the Metropolitan Police Department not to advise FBI Washington Field Office, that's the field division in Washington, D.C., of anything that had transpired. No further information will be available. No further action will be taken. That tells you a little bit about the finders, I believe. And I have a confidential informant report that has obviously been misplaced, and we will find it here in just a minute. And again, this is information from a confidential source. The finders. A CIA front formed during the 1960s. It has top clearance and protection in its assigned task of kidnapping and torture programming young children across the United States. Its specially trained government kidnappers are known to be sexual degenerates who involve the children in satanic sex orgies and bloody rituals, as well as the murders of other children and the slaughter of animals. The finders uses a fleet of unmarked vans to grab targeted children from parks and schoolyards. They then drug the children and transport them to a series of safe houses for special training. Marion David, I don't need to mention his last name, the leader of the Finders cult, he is an identified homosexual pedophile and a CIA officer whose son was an employee of the CIA proprietary firm Air America, which was notorious for its smuggling of drugs out of the Golden Triangle into Saigon during the Vietnam War, destined for the United States. Do I have a picture of this fellow? I don't have one with me, okay? Now, let me just mention one other thing. I've already talked about the Nebraska case, and I urge all of you to get a copy of the Franklin Cover-Up book by John DeCamp. It's out of print, but he did give me permission to make copies, photocopies of it, and make it available to you. During this investigation, which I mentioned in the first 2 hours, it was learned, and I was told personally by Paul Benassi and others, that in Nebraska, this evil element, these people were taking children out of private schools, and they were using them as decoys. They used Paul Benassi particularly as decoys. These are kids that are trained, by the way. And Paul himself personally told me how it was done. And when he was 10, 11, 12 years old, he now is 28, 29 years old. When he was 10, 11, 12 years old, he would go out with the adults and attract, and as a decoy, bring the children in shopping malls or parks over near the car or cars or the vans. And when they get close, the adults would grab the kids and make off with them. They'd use 2 vans or 2 automobiles, because that way if there was a witness, they'd be confused as to what the license number was. Paul told me that these kids were then kept in safe houses, the same information that my informant has here. It's a separate informant, by the way. By the way, Paul is a born-again Christian, and that's why one of the reasons I'm sure he's been talking and furnishing information. He's not furnishing everything. He's been used some discretion, obviously, because there have been attempts on his life. But Paul told me that these kids would be kept in safe houses across the country, taken to Las Vegas or Toronto, Canada, in some instances, not every instance, and auctioned off at both of those locations. He told me he had attended 6 such auctions in Las Vegas, and as few as 6, as many as 36 children were there. A blue-eyed, blonde-haired child will sell for $50,000. So $50,000 times 36 is a pretty substantial amount of money. I personally became incensed, of course, as I'm sure you are, that this is going on in our country, and the law enforcement is doing virtually nothing about it. Worse than that, they're covering it up. And I wrote letters. I've got the letters in Volume 3 of this file, this Corruption, Satanic Cult, Drug Network, and Missing Children. I wrote letters to the Honorable Don Stenberg, Attorney General of the State of Nebraska, with a copy to Ben Nelson, the governor. I wrote a letter to the FBI. I wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the United States. And I told them, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, just come call me. And I will give you the names of my informants and my sources. You interview the children yourself, and you decide whether there's any credibility here. You decide if there's an investigation that's necessary. And I received 2 responses, and they're in this volume also. One response said, your sources are not credible, and of course they don't know who my sources are. And the other one said, there's no documentation. Steinberg wrote back and said, you don't have adequate documentation. I wrote him back immediately. I gave him the documentation. It's in this same report, by the way, and I have not heard from him since. As far as the FBI is concerned, I never received a response from them. I did receive a response from the Attorney General's office, a nebulous response. It's in there also. So, you know, the FBI and the Department of Justice, they can tell you how many bank robberies occurred last year. They can tell you how many aggravated assaults, how many statutory rapes, but they cannot tell you how many children disappear every year. Nobody knows for sure how many people disappear every year. They can actually tell you, the FBI can, in homicide cases, how many children, boys or girls, killed mother, how many boys or girls killed father, how many husbands killed wives, and so forth. But they can't tell us how many children disappear every year. This is a national disgrace, absolutely national disgrace. And I contend, right here and now, that this is by design. They don't want to know. They don't want the American people to know how many children disappear every year. Actually, there are, according to the Reader's Digest, there are 100,000 children disappear every year. But the number of children who are missing is really not known for sure. The number of total missing individuals in this country is estimated up to close to 2 million. But most of those people do return. But this situation with the missing children, the children that are being auctioned off, Paul told me the story about he flew on a plane from Omaha to Los Angeles with some of these people. And there was a young boy on there. The young boy cried the whole way out to Los Angeles, young child. Paul never saw him come back to Nebraska, doesn't know what happened to him. Paul has told me about snuff films that he was involved in, where he went into a cage where they hold the Bilderberger, not the Bilderberger, but the Bohemian Grove meetings in Northern California. And he's talked about satanic ceremonies in front of the owl at the Bohemian Grove. And in fact, in the Franklin cover-up book, there's a story in there about one of the snuff films he participated in. He lived because he was part of the network, part of their network. Fortunately, as I said, he's a born-again Christian now. Also, Paul told me about on a number of occasions he would be given a ticket, airline ticket, fly to Los Angeles as a child. He would meet a man and a woman he'd never seen before, and there would be 5 passports for 5 different names, and he and this couple would fly off and drop drugs all over the world. He also talked about a customs agent that was dirty in the LAX area, Los Angeles area. So the story goes on and on and on. By the way, Paul, under the direction of John DeCamp, filed lawsuits against all the people that were involved that have been identified. This included former past publisher of the Omaha World-Herald, Harold Anderson, Bob Wadman, former chief of police, Eugene Mahoney, and others. And John DeCamp told me, all we need is the videotapes. That's the smoking gun in this case. And back when the case initially broke, the police raided the home of one of the participants, found 90 videotapes. The tapes were kept in the custody of the Omaha Police Department for a considerable period of time. When John DeCamp put pressure on the police department to come forth with the tapes, they were taken out of there and secretly taken into the court system. They were taken into the state court. The state court said it was a federal matter. It was a jurisdiction of the federal government. The state court then referred it to the federal government. The federal government eventually said, I think they may have referred it back. I'm not sure whether, in the end, either the state or the federal government had custody of it. But the long and the short of it is that initially these participants, these people that were involved in this ring, said there were no tapes. And then when they found out there were tapes, they said, well, there's nothing on the tapes that would be incriminating, yet the tapes had never been made public. And then when they found out that they were going into the court system with the tapes, they appealed to the court that they not be made public, to be kept in the custody of the court because they would destroy the reputation of reputable individuals. So as I say, that's the Nebraska case. It ties into the Finders case out of Washington, D.C. There's more than adequate documentation. There's documentation on the Franklin cover-up book that's available, as I mentioned to you earlier. And there's additional information that would be available, and it is available as we go along. Now, you see there, if you will notice, that is iced tea from last night. That's where I spilled it in my lecture. Okay. Let's go and let's talk about we're going to talk some more later on. Let's talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay? Now, let me tell you something, folks. Before George Bush left office, the anti-terrorism bill was written. One of the authors, who was a Department of Justice attorney at the time and is now a practicing attorney in Washington, D.C., made the statement publicly that before this bill will be passed, people will have to be killed. Okay. Now, along comes not the Oklahoma City bombing, but the World Trade Center bombing. And this is an article in the New York Times. It also appeared, the similar information appeared in the Los Angeles Times, October 28, 1993. And this article talks about Ahmad A. Salem, who is an informer for the FBI. Mr. Salem, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, was used by the government to penetrate a circle of Muslim extremists now charged in 2 bombing cases, the World Trade Center attack and a foiled ploy to destroy the United Nations, the Hudson River tunnels, and other New York City landmarks. He was a crucial witness in the second bombing case, but his work for the government was erratic, and for months before the Trade Center blast, he was feuding with the FBI. After the bombing, he resumed his undercover work in an undated transcript of a conversation from that period. Mr. Salem recounts a talk he had earlier with agents about an unnamed FBI supervisor who he said came and messed it up. He requested to meet me in the hotel, Mr. Salem says of the supervisor. He requested to make me to testify, and he didn't push for that. We'll be building the bomb with a phony powder and grabbing the people who will be involved in it. But since you
and that continues over on page. He didn't do that. Well, it looks like I left out part of the page. The transcript quotes Mr. Salem as saying that he wanted to complain to FBI and headquarters in Washington, D.C. about the Bureau's failure to stop the bombing, but was dissuaded by an agent identified as John Antisev, I guess. He said he didn't think that the New York people would like this thing. To make a long story short, ladies and gentlemen, over here, another point in the transcript, Mr. Salem recounts a conversation he said he had with Mr. Antisev, saying, guys, now you saw this bomb went off, and you both know that we could avoid that. At another point, Mr. Salem says, you get paid, you get guys, to prevent problems like this from happening. To make a long story short, this man was an FBI handler, FBI informant. His FBI handler, in a conversation with him, he recorded his conversation with the FBI handler. This documents that the FBI knew in advance they were going to bomb the World Trade Center bombing. Did not prevent it from happening. 6 people killed, $500,000 in damage, over 1,000 people injured. If I was a congressman or senator in Washington, D.C., and I knew that the FBI could have prevented a bombing, any bombing, I would be stomping up and down on my desk, and I would ask for an immediate investigation. I personally handled a bombing conspiracy in Los Angeles when I was the senior special agent in charge there. We had the Weather Underground that planned to bomb a state senator's office. We planted our informants in the group. Our informants were actually FBI undercover agents. And we went right up to the morning of the bombing before we arrested them and tried them for conspiracy. But that brings me now up to the present time, or I should say a year ago, last April the 19th. I'm in my living room, relaxing. I'm watching the television, and the bombing occurred. And I watched the TV news, and they were saying it was an ammonia nitrate bomb. And then I received a fax, and according to this fax was from the University of Oklahoma Geology Department, and it was a survey, University of Oklahoma. According to this fax, the seismogram, there were 2 detonations, one there and one there. That, by the way, I talked to Dr. Brown at the University of Oklahoma. That was a train went by just before this, so that doesn't count right there. But they said that very clearly there was an explosion or detonation or groundswell, 9:02 and 3 seconds, and again 10 seconds later, 9:02 and 13 seconds. And I'll give you a larger view of that. Now there's an enlargement of it. That's the train there. Here's the first one. That's the second one. I called a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he's in jail. He was, I have friends in jail. He was a CIA agent in his day, and he was going to testify against the government on the Inslaw case. And he calls me 2, 3, 4 times a week, by the way. And he was warned before he was going to sign an affidavit on the Inslaw case, if you sign that affidavit, you will go to jail. 6 weeks after he signed the affidavit, he was arrested, and he's now serving 30 years first offense for manufacturing drugs. For your information, the story on the Inslaw case, just one of many. This was a computer system developed by a fellow named Bill Hamilton, and it involved what is called the Promise software. This tied the whole network, law enforcement, the courts, the locals, and the federals together in one big network. And Bill Hamilton developed it, called it the Inslaw, the Promise software, sold it, leased it to the Department of Justice for 3 years. At the end of 2 years, the Department of Justice refused to pay him. He went into bankruptcy court, filed a lawsuit, won the lawsuit in bankruptcy court, spent several $1 million winning the lawsuit. And the case was appealed by the government, and the courts came out, the appellate court came back and said, you have to go into another court. You're in the wrong court, fellow. You start all over again. And so he's in the position now where he's bankrupt, and what happened to the computer system. It was sold by it was given by the Department of Justice to a man named Earl Bryant. He used to be head of the UPI, United Press International. Earl Bryant had raised millions of dollars for Ronald Reagan. It was a political payoff. Bryant then turned around and sold it back to the Department of Justice, I understand, for in the area of $10 million. It was then sold to the Israelis and to the Canadians with the trapdoor in it, which meant that we were able to retrieve any information that they developed on it. Anyway, Michael had worked on it as a CIA agent to refine it, and he was going to testify for Bill Hamilton in that regard. That gives you a little background on Michael. By the way, there's extensive intelligence information about Michael in my bombing report. Talks about some of his past activities. His family owned the Hercules manufacturing company out of the Silicon Valley, and Michael is very intelligent. Probably one of the brightest men I've ever known. Anyway, Michael calls me, and I tell him, hey, Michael, there's 2 detonations, not one, and the government says this is an ammonia nitrate fertilizer bomb. Michael says, not possible. And he said, that's my bomb. Well, what he's talking about there is the ammonia nitrate, not the ammonia, the electrohydrodynamic gaseous fuel device. This shows you some of the damage, by the way. Now, ammonia nitrate bomb, or fertilizer bomb, disperses 360 degrees, evenly, or unevenly, really. It also lets off gases, and immediately after the bombing, people would not have been able to go into the building without gas masks. But people went in there immediately, and they did not have gas masks on. This shows the damage to the building. Look at this. And half a moon there, and then comes back out. This was a directional bomb. There have been several theories on General Pardon had a theory that somebody wrapped the pillars down below. Galen Windsor said it was a neutron bomb and so forth. We don't know for sure what it was. We think it was the electrohydrodynamic gaseous fuel device, a combination of that and ammonia nitrate. Because we do know for a fact, we're pretty sure that they bought at least 4,000 pounds worth of fertilizer, McVeigh and Nichols. Of course, they haven't been convicted yet, so we can't say that they are guilty. We have to be very I don't think there's any question about it. We've seen the signs. See that? Right? See that and the similar there? And this is Asmodee. A strong and powerful king appears with 3 heads, the first like a bull, the second like a man, and the third like a ram. He has a serpent's tail, the webbed feet of goose, and he vomits fire. He rides an infernal dragon, carries lance and pennon, and is the chief of the power of Ammon. He must be invoked bareheaded, or otherwise he will deceive. He gives the ring of virtues, teaches arithmetic, geometry, and other handicrafts, answers all questions, makes men invisible, indicates the places of concealed treasures, and guards them if within the domination of Ammon. Star, 5-pointed star. This is a rock, a large rock that had been broken. And this was a circle. These were rocks with concrete, and it was filled with concrete. I don't know what they used that for. One of their ceremonies, obviously. And this was up just in front of the house that burned down. And you would have, this looks out over the valley. This built right on the side of the mountain. This is all fill, by the way. And this went down, must have gone down 200-300 feet, these rocks in the fill. So it cost them an awful lot of money. Now, this is San Bernardino, California. And there's the road that leads up to the mountain. And I drove up on this mountain, on this road, and you can see this enclave on the side of the mountain. That's looking from where the back of if I step back out, I'd gone down the mountain, right? That's looking in the other direction. There's my associate Judy, and the house was up in there. Now there's a street in front of the house. You cannot see down over the hill from the street, so it's very safe apparently for them. Well, how clever! We have a house, HR 666, right? Now, this next case, which I'm going to describe to you and give you details on, is the Lou Bear case. I'll tell you what, before I give you the Lou Bear case, I'll talk a little more. I mentioned the McMartin case. Let me talk some more about that. In 1983, the case broke, as I mentioned. This McMartin School was built in 1966. The children claimed, as I said, that there were tunnels under the school. They were taken into the tunnels. The district attorney went out and looked for tunnels, could not find them. In the spring of 1990, the property was sold from the McMartins to the defense attorney, or given to the defense attorney, Danny Davis, because he said he was broke. He only made $3 million on the case. And it was sold from Danny Davis to a contractor who decided he wanted to build a building, an office building on there. When we learned, some of the parents and I learned that a contractor had access to the property, we felt we could get access to it. And so we contacted him. I actually signed a contract with him. And we went in. He gave us two weeks to go in and look for tunnels. As I said, the DA had looked for tunnels several years earlier and had not found them. So I hired an archaeologist, Dr. Gary Stickle at UCLA. We began our tunnel dig. The parents were very nice. They went out and got coffee and ham and cheese sandwiches for us. But I wouldn't let them get near any of the evidence. And Dr. Gary Stickle brought in his own team of archaeologists. And all I did was coordinate the project. He actually did the scientific work. We found tunnels, ladies and gentlemen. Here's an idea of what we found. We found a 9-foot wide subterranean entrance went into the west wall of the dog room. The entrance had a live avocado tree on the right, a dead one on the left, which meant that when they opened up the entrance, they had to cut the tree, cut the tree root. An interesting facet was this. There was a Disney bag, copyright 1982, found 4.5 feet below the classroom floor and 3 to 6 inches in from the entrance and under the foundation of classroom 4. The Disney bag was found right in the mouth of the tunnel where the kids said they went in. Now, the way that the archaeologists were able to say that there were tunnels there that had been filled in is because the dirt that was brought in to fill the tunnels was foreign from the natural soil. And right at this location, this copyright 1982 plastic Disney bag, sandwich bag, was at that precise location where the entrance to the tunnel was. Ken Lanning, the FBI behavioral science expert, quote unquote, out of Quantico, claims, has publicly made the claim, I've been told this, I don't know if he said this or not, that I went out and found this little bag and put it there, placed it there. Not true. The tunnel was actually 30 inches wide, 44 to 46 inches deep, with the top of the tunnel 30 inches under the classroom floor. The footing between classroom 3 and 4 was arched where the tunnel passed underneath and 12 inches shorter in depth at this location than some footing, the same footing 12 feet to the north. This is significant because it would indicate that the tunnels were built at the time that the house, that the school was built. It was part of it because they actually arched the foundation when they put the foundation in. So I think that's very important. And the 9-foot wide chamber was found along the channel under classroom 4. There was a 7-foot tunnel extending into the triplex next door. The children, as I said, claimed they were taken up into a trap door of the bathroom of the triplex and taken out into the community. There was a crawl space of about 18 to 20 inches. We got one of our thinner and skinnier members to go in there with the camera, and the bathtub actually protruded below the surface of the floor, and you could see where the floor had been sawed out. So there was definitely a trap door there of some sort. Other significant facts: a small white plastic plate with 3 pentagrams hand-drawn on the top of the green paint was found. I've got copies of that. I'll show you that in just a minute. Many other artifacts were found. There were no doorknobs on classroom 3, only a deadbolt lock. Each classroom had an on and off light switch labeled fire alarm. System did not connect to a fire station but was used as an alert within the school. In other words, if somebody came around, somebody could push the alarm and it would notify either somebody in the office or somebody else, wherever they were, that there was intruders or strangers in the area. There were more than 2,000 artifacts were found under the school floor, including over 100 animal bones. It was kind of an interesting story because we were given 2 weeks to get off the property. The man wanted to build an office building there, and was able to stall him for 34 days. And I couldn't get the archaeologist to say, come on, there's tunnels there, Gary. You know there's tunnels there. He said, no, I want to make sure, Well, after all, I don't blame him. But the contractor told me, look, I don't care if you find tunnels or not. Tomorrow at noon, we're bringing the bulldozers up there, and we're going to level that building. And you better not be in it because you'll go down with the building. So the morning of the 34th day, Dr. Gary Stickle finally said, okay, I will admit that I think there's tunnels here. There were tunnels here at one time that had been filled in. And we literally walked out of there, had a press conference and walked out of there as the bulldozers came in and tore it down. Before the bulldozers came in and tore it down, we called the district attorney's office. Okay, this was in the middle of the second trial. The first trial, Virginia McMartin had been acquitted. Ray Buckey, the son, was hung jury. The second trial was in process right at that time. They sent an investigator out, Perez is his name, and he got out of the car. I greeted him. He said, look, I don't want to talk to you. I said, this is like the Democratic rally I was at in Galveston, right? Nobody wants to talk to me. I said, why don't you want to talk to me? He says, I don't want to talk to you because all you'll do is argue with me. I said, okay, I'll just keep my mouth shut. You come in and talk to the archaeologist. So I took him in to talk to the archaeologist, and he argued with the archaeologist. He said, there's no tunnels there. And here you can imagine somebody like an investigator arguing with an expert witness who has a doctor's degree in archaeology. Anyway, we prevailed. As far as I'm concerned, we have the documentation. They didn't use the information in the trial. Now, what did these kids say? Well, they identified professional football players. They identified professional baseball players. They identified some actors. They identified the son of one of the most prominent politicians in Los Angeles. Well, you know, no wonder, huh? How about that? Now, there is where the tunnel entrance was, right there. The kid said there were rabbit cages there. And I'll show you more about that in a minute. The tunnel, we documented the tunnel went like this. There was a chamber there and went across here. Here's where the arch was, right there. We theorized that the tunnel went here. We didn't have time to dig for that. And there's over into the property next door. This is the triplex. This is about where the trap door in the bathroom was. Here's a live avocado tree. Now keep these in mind because I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. Live avocado tree. This was a play area right in here. We actually slept up there. We had control of that property for 24 hours for 34 straight days. Slept up there in the dirt. Now this is the entrance. There's the live avocado tree root. The avocado tree was over in here. The dead root was over here, which would indicate that they had to cut it, right, like this. Live, dead. That's the child's plate that we found in the sandbox. It was buried about 6 inches under. We really did a job on the property. There's the There's the arch. There's the tunnel went from. This is classroom 4 over there. On the other side of the arch is classroom 3. Notice it's arched, just as I said. There's yours truly, looking up from down below. We actually brought in concrete cutters to cut that floor up. And we did a job on it. I graduated at the University of Nebraska, so I wore my Nebraska baseball hat for good luck. You see it there. For all you KU fans, K-State fans, Missouri fans. This town's full of them. Well, I might just show you. I have a number of symbols here. This is the horned hand, sign of recognition between those who are in the occult. May also innocently be used by those who identify with heavy metal music. That was at the inauguration, when he was inaugurated. He was, I've seen the video of it. He was waving like this to the crowd at the last minute. He went down and went like this for a second. Okay, that tells you a little bit about the cults and satanic cults and preschools. By the way, Dr. Roland Summit, psychiatrist at UCLA, has told me that he's also involved in these issues, that he has intelligence information and otherwise, that there are more than 50 preschools around the country where they claim that there's been sexual ritual abuse, and tunnels are located under the schools, more than 50 of them. The McMartin family traveled all over the world because they were experts in putting preschools together, organizing them, showing them how to build the schools and so forth. There were more than 5,500 children went through this McMartin school from the time it was built in 1966 until 1983, when this incident was alleged to have taken place. The cults use these 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old children for several purposes. Number one, they use them for pornographic films. There's a lot of money, $10 billion a year, pornographic business in this country. They use them in their initiation. They consider them initiated into the cult, even though their parents don't know about it. And they use them as part of their ceremonies. In other words, they need children in certain ceremonies. Now, I've been told, well, now don't tell me the kids, if they witnessed a human sacrifice or the sacrifice of a baby, that they wouldn't go home and tell their parents about it. But I'll tell you what a little girl in the McMartin case told me. And she told her mother, and her mother told me. She told her mother that she witnessed these sacrifices, and that on one occasion, after her mother dropped her off in the morning and before the mother picked her up at night, she was taken to her bedroom, back to her home. They went into the house. They sexually molested her in the home, in the bedroom. They left a little token there. They took her little baby kitten, took the kitten into the school, and had a ceremony and sacrificed the kitten in front of her. Then they told the little girl, they said, if you talk to your mother or your father, we're going to do this to your mother and your father and your little brother. Now, don't tell me that a kid's going to talk under those conditions. They're petrified. They also talked about men coming in and sexually molesting them dressed in police uniforms, dressed as Santa Claus, and so forth. So now I'd like to discuss the Lou Bear case with you. This is a case out of Philadelphia. I've worked a number of these cases, by the way, and I can't begin to give them all to you because I think we'd be here all night. But this is a case where the father was divorced from the mother, and the children would come visit him, and he noted signs of satanic ritual abuse with the kids, just from their actions and their talking and some of the things that they were doing. And there are certain signs, by the way, but we don't need to present them here. Again, we don't have time. So he went to the courts and tried to get relief from the courts, tried to get the kids taken away from the mother. And he did not receive any satisfaction there. So Lou Bear grabbed his kids one day when they were visiting with him and disappeared, went into the underground down in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, the FBI, in my day, we were involved in kidnapping, extortion, bank robberies, skyjackings, as I said earlier. Well, now they're involved in domestic cases. And they go out and look for these children, and they go out and look for these parents. And they came down and arrested Lou Bear, and they took the children away from him. The last time I talked to Lou, he had not seen his children in 4 years. But in an attempt to have his children come see him for visitation, he went back into court with these allegations. And the evidence he had some medical evidence, but also the 5-, 6-year-old child had drawn some pictures that were unsolicited by him or by anybody else. And so as an expert, so-called expert on Satanism, I was asked to examine these pictures and give my opinion on it. I flew to Philadelphia, examined the pictures, and concluded that I felt the children had been exposed to some sort of or degree of satanic activity. And these are the pictures. Now, when I was this age, I was drawing airplanes and cars, and my little female friends were drawing flowers and other things of that nature. And in this particular instance, this is a picture that he drew of a man on an altar. Notice the blood and so forth. By the way, children who have been sexually abused will oftentimes draw the genitals, whereas if they've never been abused and they draw a nude body, they never draw the genitals. Now, this is, again, a picture unsolicited. People, fire, throws a baby in the fire. This is apparently an altar. Bone, liver, blood, kitty. Matt Bear is the kid's name, drawn August 24th, 89. Again, this is obviously a ritual outside, outdoors, table, fire, people, devil, crossed out. Again, the ritual, knife. People have no cloth on, he says. Oftentimes they're in the nude. Oftentimes they wear robes, and they're nude underneath the robes. This is the most revealing of all. I mentioned earlier about the goat head. This would indicate that the child was exposed to a higher degree of satanic activity than the normal. These are 3 to 6 inches, 3 to 6 feet tall, made out of wood. Oftentimes, it's a goat head on the top. That's what I would have used in my testimony. By the way, I made a second trip back to the courts, and when they had a hearing, and the judge wouldn't even let me in the courtroom. I sat outside on a bench all day long. Here's the article on the McMartin Tunnel. McMartin digs suspended, no evidence of secret tunnels. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's see. We've got 3 minutes, and I'm going to just answer as many questions as I can. How was the fire started at Waco? I don't know. I was told that the fire was started by the tanks coming in and using gas. Again, I don't have documentation on that. Please explain the $1 billion per day to Russia. Why $1 billion and why to Russia? I don't know. I've got to talk to an economist about that. I just learned that in the last few days. Why are they postponing or delaying the trials of McVeigh and Nichols in Colorado? I don't know that one either. I'm not doing so well, am I, on these questions? You'll have to ask the judge that. Do you have any updates on Anton LaVey? Whereabouts, condition? The last I heard, he was in the Bay Area. I've been on some TV shows with his daughter, Zin LaVey. What was White Rose, Black Rose? That was a drug operation that I explained earlier. What's your opinion on Nixon and Eisenhower? I don't think I have enough time to give that one. Tell us more about the concentration camps. They are being built on the military bases. There's no question about it. I have documentation about this. How do you feel about the national curfew? I don't trust anything that Bill Clinton says about national curfew or anything else. I think it's a facade to try to get votes. And also, how about the child they're talking about adopting? I want to have a bumper sticker out. I'm going to say, Bill, is it one of yours? Are you afraid of being eliminated like Kennedy or speaking out? Well, no, not really. I've been very fortunate. There have been attempts on my life. I've had situations where I had tight security problems, and I've made it so far, and I feel that God is watching over me. And that is all I can tell you right now. Time has just run out. Thank you very much.